Hello, biology students. Welcome to the last 9 weeks of distance learning. This is Mrs. Brooker, and we are going to focus these last 9 weeks on bacteria and viruses, the little guys in the scope of living things on this planet. And they're both good and bad. So we're excited to teach you the basics and go into depth on some of the more interesting aspects of these little guys. So let's begin with viruses. Viruses are incredibly tiny. So let's look at this image here. On the far right, the largest living thing on here that we have, or a pre-living thing, is a frog egg. Then you have a human egg and a little yellow speck of pollen that you might see from your Easter lily. You've got two types of cells, plant and animal cells. Red blood cells are a little bit smaller. And now we're getting so tiny that we're looking inside of something that's already small. So this is a mitochondria, the powerhouse, inside of these two cells. And even smaller than that, you have the flu virus. So all of these can be seen like we've done in class with a light microscope, but something that's interesting is an electron microscope. Let me show you that. Okay, here is an electron microscope right there. These are very expensive. So for some context, our microscopes in our labs at our high school give you a mag of 400x. So you see something 400 times bigger. An electron microscope gives you an image up to 500,000 times larger. So you can see these really beautiful images that you can get. So there are some fly eyes there. There you have some rod-shaped bacteria. They're very expensive, and they're honestly very cool. Probably when you're in college, you might get a chance to use one in your biology class. But that is what you would use to observe a virus. Okay, viruses come in many really cool geometric shapes. So you have your tobacco mosaics, your adenoviruses, your influenza viruses that cause the flu. Then these bacteriophages are really interesting. They look like spiders, and they basically go on top of a bacteria like a spider and inject their DNA inside of the bacteria. It's kind of a weird thought to think of a bacteria having a virus because we think bacteria makes us sick. But bacteria have something that makes it sick called the bacteriophage. Any living thing can get a virus. A fungus can get a virus. A plant can get a virus. A bacteria can get a virus. A human can get a virus. So viruses look complicated, but honestly, they're very simple. They all have DNA or RNA, so double-stranded genetic material or single-stranded genetic material, and their DNA is protected by some sort of a protein coat. This would be like our cell membrane, but instead of made out of fat, it's made out of protein. So they have DNA or RNA and some sort of protection for that DNA or RNA. So we will watch the first 2 minutes.
Chances are, in your life, you've had the common cold before. It can cause sneezing and coughing and can make you feel awful. The worst thing about the common cold is that you can take medications to help with the symptoms, but you really can't treat the actual cold with antibiotics like you would a strep throat infection or an infected tooth. Why? Well, let's talk about what causes it: a virus. The common cold is caused by a virus. While all living things are made of one or more cells, see the modern cell theory, viruses are not cells. Viruses aren't technically classified as living things since they lack many characteristics of life. But there is some debate in calling them non living as well. Medications like antibiotics attack bacteria like E. coli, which are living cells. Antifungal medications can be used on fungi like athlete's foot, which are made of living cells. Viruses are not bacteria or fungi. You can't classify a virus as a prokaryote or a eukaryote either because it's not a cell. So, what is their structure like? First of all, viruses are much, much smaller than cells. You typically are going to need an electron microscope in order to see a virus. Viruses come in many shapes. Our favorite one to draw is the bacteriophage. It sounds very fancy, but it's a type of virus that tends to attack bacteria. Despite this being our favorite to draw, know that the shape of viruses vary greatly. One thing all viruses have in common is that they have some type of genetic material. This genetic material can be in the form of DNA or RNA. Viruses usually have some kind of protein coat, also known as a capsid. The capsid can protect the DNA or RNA genetic material. Viruses can also have other structures. Some viruses package special enzymes with them. Some viruses have an outer envelope. These additions can be useful to the virus in virus replication. One thing that makes virus replication or reproduction unique is that they can't replicate without a host. And it's their reproducing that tends to be a problem for its host, whether the host is you, in the case of the common cold, or an insect, plant, this bacterium. Viruses tend to be very specific for the host that they're going to infect. But anything that is alive can be a host because cells have the machinery that viruses need in order to replicate.
Okay, guys, the last thing I want to go over is whether or not viruses are considered to be a living thing or a non living thing. So here are some examples in both arguments. Some people would say living thing because it has genetic material. So it does have a code that it uses to produce its proteins and other needed materials. It has a protective coat like our cell membrane, and it can indeed replicate, but the contingency is it has to have a host. It has to be inside of something. So that is both, in my opinion, a living and a non-living characteristic. They're not cell-based. They can't reproduce on their own, and they only have DNA or RNA, whereas a living thing would use both. So right now, the scientific community is on the non-living side for viruses, but there is some evidence for the living side.